Good afternoon, folks, and welcome all of you to the Pervasive Media Lunchtime Talk. So these talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hi, online folks. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing a purple t-shirt today. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, which is your chance to spend some time in the space, hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So an especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Okay, quite a few today. All right, this bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And what we do is we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make time for collaboration. So a few notes before we begin. We are a little bit cramped in here today. There's quite a lot of you, but please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can make a cup of tea, grab a glass of water, etc. We do have a quiet space just next to this space, so my left to your right, just over there. There's a little door. You can pop in there if you need to take a break at any point. There's some sofas and beanbags, and it's quite a pleasant place to have a nap. Fire exits. We are not expecting a fire drill today, so if you hear a fire alarm, that is probably real. The fire exits are at the other end of the studio. Again, my left, your right, down there. If you hear something, the studio team will direct you towards them. And then there are accessible toilets and baby change in the corridor over there next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. Those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Emma will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, then you can raise your hand and we'll send around a microphone so the folks at home can hear what you're saying. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. I have rattled through all of that because we are running a little bit late today, but it's going to be fine. Our speaker for today is Rosie Poebright. Rosie is a story experience architect, digital artist, and real-world game designer with a doctorate in audience participation, who has designed pervasive games and playful happenings since 2007. In today's talk, they're going to be sharing some of what they've learned from 5 years of PhD research into wild stories, exploring the fields of neuroscience, philosophy, and anthropology. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Rosie.
Hi. Apologies for the late start. It's entirely my fault. I've been dealing with a dog that's just had 3 teeth extracted yesterday evening, this morning, and he's not happy and didn't want me to leave. So he's fine. He's absolutely fine. But, you know, life, etc. OK, so I'm going to attempt to condense 5+ years of research and like 15 years of making interactive story experiences into like 35, 40 minutes. Maybe 35 minutes because we're running late. So forgive me if it's not coherent. Feel free to, well, maybe we'll do questions at the end, actually. Yeah, I was going to say, I like being interrupted, but no, let's do that later because I will go off in the wrong direction. I'm an artist and basically interactive story designer. I've been doing that for 15 years, already mentioned that. And I started out making real-world story games through the community here at the Pervasive Media Studio. So doing stuff live on the streets with actors running around. And these days, I make primarily audio-based things that are interactive in some way or another and speak to the aliveness of my audience. So what we're talking about today, is about telling stories in better ways and not using screens. So my PowerPoint presentation is basically 1 slide long, apart from the intro and outro slide. Because of that, this is my willful pushing against the system and not wanting to be looking at screens, because I'm talking about trying to imagine ourselves past screens. And yeah, my research essentially on this PhD has been about attempting to uncover those ways, those elements of experience that speak to our aliveness, and map that. And I ended up creating a series of design principles for other, what I call wild stories or wild story makers. So that will be, when the PhD is finally published, that will be available. But I'm not going to go into that much detail. We don't have that much time, but that exists. So I'm just saying I've created a framework to help other people think through these things I've been thinking through. And yeah, I've covered a range of different fields. I'm a practice as a researcher, so I'm an artist. I've made things that help me uncover things, but I've also done research across a range of fields, including psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, a wee bit of anthropology, art. So that's all kind of in the mix as well. And yeah, I suppose the thing that drives me is I've been making this stuff for a while, and we've got this extraordinary opportunity right now that didn't exist actually when I started making these things 15, 20 years ago, which is these like supercomputers that we carry around in our pockets, yada, yada, we all know about that. But actually, it enables all kinds of really exciting things. We can know lots of things about where our audience is, how fast their heart rate is, movement, but not just GPS movement, but like really kind of delicate types of movement, which can all feed into how the story they're in progresses, right, and how it responds to them. I think that's really exciting. But somehow we're still spending 4 hours a day watching Netflix. And I'm a bit like depressed by that. Like, we're still dominated by screens. We can't quite tear ourselves away from them. And we can't, and because of that, we're not, I think, investing enough time and resources in exploring other ways to tell stories that aren't kind of visually dominated, essentially. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Yeah, forgive me for looking back at my notes. I'm dyspraxic. I've got a very bad short-term memory, and that's what's going on here. So disability in action. Yeah, so I'm a practice as researcher. We've talked about that. And yeah, I'm interested in this corporeal engagement with the world and with each other and with kind of the story itself and how, and so I've sort of sectioned that off into kind of 3 key research areas of like the body, others, and then like worlds, material worlds, virtual worlds, that kind of thing, in order to create something that I call a wild story, which is this sort of story that speaks to aliveness. But to start off, I'm going to get you guys to try, I'm going to give you an example of what one of these things is, because it's all a bit conceptual at the moment. So I'm going to get you guys to try and imagine it. So if you're willing, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I'm just going to talk you through what the beginning of one of these experiences was like. There's nothing terrible is going to happen here, nothing shocking, and you don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to, but it's there as an option. Just going to have so imagine yourself sat in a McDonald's restaurant on one of those hard plastic, slightly slippery chairs. You can feel your feet on the ground, your arms are on the table in front of you, and your hands are holding a hot cup of tea, which is nice. It's nice to have that warmness on your hands. And you can hear people milling around, sort of relatively busy. You can feel the sort of harsh neon lights through your eyelids. You can smell like fried things in the air. But that's where you are, that's what you're feeling. And then suddenly, you're hearing the internal perspective of Kelechi, who's a Nigerian woman who is in the process of gaining her British citizenship. She's a migrant to the UK. And so you're hearing her sat in McDonald's thinking about the things she needs to do, about the anniversary present she needs to get her husband, about her kid, who's like 1.5, and about the citizenship test that she's got looming in her near future. And then the phone in front of you vibrates, and it's a text message from her best mate, who is joking around with her about what kind of anniversary present she's going to get for her husband. Is it going to be the form of like sexy knickers, or is it going to be, you know, some beer, or like taking the piss basically out of where their relationship's at right now post-child. And okay, you can open your eyes, but that's kind of the beginning scene of Home and Each Other, which is was an audio experience that we started in the McDonald's in Broadmead. And you're then invited as an audience member to get up and wander into Broadmead because Kelechi's doing so. And you've been invited to mirror what she does as she moves around the shopping centre. And that creates this really interesting thing where you're kind of following her, but also you're hearing her thinking about the world and her memories, and also hearing her reactions to things as they happen. So it's written in a very particular way so that it's going to be tuning into your material world that you're in, but also you're being encouraged to tune into what Kelechi is going through and be good company for her, essentially, throughout that story. So that's an example. And that's the kind of, I mean, that's not the only way to do a wild story, right? That's how I do them, but there's many, many ways of doing it. But that's my, I guess, and that's my nemesis to this idea of why aren't our stories better? Why are we dominated by screens? Guy Debord, who's French, right? Let's say Guy, I don't know. Yeah, okay, I'm getting nods, that's good. I read these names, but I don't say them out loud very often, so I don't necessarily know. But he talked about the idea of the society of the spectacle, so the idea of spectators being kind of given these entertainments in the form of cinema, perhaps even theatre, but sitting in audiences and watching drama unfold in front of them and feeling big feelings, and then being kind of emptied back out onto the streets, feeling like they've done a thing, right? And then just going about their normal lives, feeling satisfied, having this sort of cathartic moment where, oh yeah, this big dramatic thing happened, I cried, then I came out, and like, okay, where's McDonald's, right? That's the next thing. And he was questioning that as a way of, I guess, basically keeping the citizenry in a kind of state of like perpetual entertainedness, but without the discomfort that is necessary to create societal change, to kind of take action to change the world. And so I guess there's something in that sort of firing up what I'm up to with my work, which is trying to get sort of disempowered feeling citizenry sort of to act and to change and to move around and to do things, to change things. Because we're in a time where, you know, there's quite a lot at stake in terms of like the future of humanity if you think about all the different things at play in global politics and in terms of climate change. And so it really is a time when if we ever needed to act, it's kind of now. And that's one of the other sort of drivers, I guess, behind what I'm up to here in this trying to understand. But the other part of the trying to understand was one of the first projects that I worked on that was to do with a wild story, which again was one of these projects that came out of the early days of the Pervasive Media Studio, which was called 2.8 Hours Later. And it was a zombie chase game that was multiple locations across the city. And we created a narrative for the audience to run through, literally run through because they're being chased by actual zombies who were trying to infect them. And they had to sort of solve puzzles and get to the end without getting infected. And if they got caught, they were infected, which had a consequence on what happened to them at the end of the story. So people were really invested in not getting caught, to the extent that they were the first iteration of the game, you know, they were running out into the street to get away from zombies, but obviously there's also real world cars in the, so it was like, you know, no one died, but it was it was quite scary to look at. So that was one of the first things I sort of worked on, was kind of helping the first iteration of that and then directing the second iteration of it. And what I noticed in the audience was that they were so fully engaged in what was going on. They had dilated pupils, their eyes were wide open, they were like sweating, they were ready to act, and they were really feeling all of this stuff. And they knew it was a story, but they were also living the story as if it was real, which just kind of fascinated me. And ever since then, I've sort of been trying to tease out, okay, what are the things at play here that make that so real? And like, how can I use them in like easier to put together formats than having like, 50 zombies that I've trained and like road closure orders. And, it was difficult to put those things on, which is why I kind of switched into audio, which, also has difficulties, but I'm not going to go into that. So let's go into a bit more to do with my sort of thesis research, which is these three themes of like body, others, and world that then kind of culminate into this idea of wild stories. And if I start with a sip of tea, because my mouth is getting dry. Okay, so I started on this PhD really excited about the idea of embodied cognition, and that is this sort of neuroscience, psychology idea that we understand the world first and foremost through our bodies, which shouldn't be, it's not news to us, right? But it's not just through our bodies. It's not like our brains are kind of floating along, receiving signals from the body and then thinking and sending things back. The idea is that actually there's cognition happening in those pathways between the body and the brain, and that there's an intelligence there as well. And I guess the sort of the key person in that field who I've been like following, who's quite popular, sort of popular writer, Antonio Damasio, talks about the body loop, right? He talks about the somatic marker theory, which is this idea that when something happens to us, our body, our soma, marks it by recording what's happening in the body. So if we imagine a ginger cat running up, attacking my leg, and like digging its claws in and like biting my ankle, there'll be a bunch of stuff that happens, right? There'll be the sort of sensorial stuff going on in my skin that's telling me, oh, I'm damaged, I'm scratched, that hurts. There'll probably be my sort of microfacial muscles that are kind of like, oh, what's this? Oh my God, what shall I do? I shouldn't kick it, but like, it's attacking my leg. How do I get it off? And then probably my heart rate will increase. I might start sweating. And all of those things are body markers that then get associated with this idea of a ginger cat running at me, so that next time that happens, I'll have an idea of what might be about to happen, so I can prepare for it. So we have those body loops that, we've got these physiological somatic markers that then together turn into a feeling that gets interpreted into an emotion by the brain, by the cognitive stuff. And then that's how we kind of feel stuff, but that's also how we predict what's going to happen in the world. It's how we understand the world. It was part of one of the building blocks. And then the second part of the body loop is the as-if body loop. So it's the sort of what happens when you imagine. Probably what some of you were just doing was imagining a ginger cat coming and attacking your own leg and what that might feel like, and engaging with the sensorial stuff of your past experience and using that to construct as if you were being attacked by a ginger cat. Everyone's looking at my ankle now. It's a bit strange. But that's kind of what we're talking about. So the as-if is a reconstruction, but those pathways are still, the neural pathways are still being fired across my whole body. It's not just happening up here, it's happening in my body as well. And those things are super interesting to me because I came across them. And I've got a quote as well, and this is from Galiz and Wachowski. So Galiz is one of the people who was behind understanding mirror neurons, which is kind of at play in what we're talking about here. So mirror neurons being neurons that are fired when we see something happen to someone else, and we fire off similar neurons to what they're experiencing in our own brains to understand what's happening. So it's, again, this as-if simulation that goes on. I mean, yeah, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to like compare these two theories and kind of say how they are and aren't different, but there's a resonance there, right? So anyway, he's a mirror neuron guy. And he did a study with Wachowski around people when they engage with fictional characters rather than actual people. And so what he says is, there's never not a reader response at the core of which is the feeling of body. So this is what he's talking about. There's never not a reader response at the core of which is the feeling of body. The author's subjective correlative guides us into the imagined lives of others through the synesthesia of embodied metaphor. So the author's subjective correlative, which is the author, this is the author giving this to the audience member, their own subjective correlative gets into the imagination of other people through this synesthesia of embodied metaphor. So the author's getting into your bodies through this body loop, this as-if body loop, or mirror neurons. Like I say, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to get into too much detail there. But I'd love to. Like, if anyone here is a neuroscientist, wants to talk about it, I'd love that. The synesthesia of embodied metaphor, imagined bodily experience standing in for affective states and dispositions, for sensations, thoughts, and memories, right? So that's kind of a way of kind of explaining what's going on. But I also came across it in my, so I did practice this research, so I made works and then asked my audience members how they experienced it to sort of understand what was going on, essentially. And that's how I did a lot of my research. And one of the projects that I worked on as part of this PhD, which was a collaboration with another artist called Michelle Roach, was called Play Inside. And we created these experiential podcasts that you listen to in your own home, and you're encouraged to mirror the actions of the protagonist in a little 10-minute story as they're wandering around their home. You kind of wash your hands at the same time or sit down on the sofa at the same time, and it creates this, again, this sort of shared space. And one of the moments in that was the character who was she was 9-month pregnant woman, was doing a cat-cow. So she was doing some yoga because she felt stiff. And she's trying to do a cat-cow. So you're kind of, if you're up for it, you're doing that along with her. And then she's had enough. So she tries to get up. She gets up. And she's thinking, OK, I've got to get up. I get up. And so all of our audience members get up. But the thing is, the character's still on the floor because she can't get up the first time because she's quite heavy. And it's not easy to get off the floor to standing when you're 9 months pregnant. And so there's this moment of like dissonance, which I'm going to come back to actually, which is quite interesting, because there's a difference in my non-pregnant body versus this person down here with 9 months pregnancy going on. But one of my respondents, one of my audience participants, reported when she got up, she felt a tug in her arm. She felt this kind of need, her arm reached itself back, basically. And when I was interviewing this respondent, she understood that as her arm going to help the pregnant lady off the floor, which for like a piece of audio, which isn't even that interactive, right? It's just a straightforward MP3, right? Was pretty cool, like pretty interesting that happens. Like the body is responding before she's even thought about it. You know, she worked that out afterwards, but and there's something there, this sort of embodied intelligence, this embodied imagination, showing that there's stuff at play before we've even sort of cognitively rationalized and interpreted what's going on. There's already interpretation and response to events at play. Right. Okay, so there's something interesting here. Participating in stories, so kinetically moving around, like moving around in stories, creates a sort of participation. It creates a different kind of engagement. And I'm suggesting that it's opening the way for us to create our own body loops that are to do with the action of the story, but because they get laid down in us, like the body loop, as if, you know, the cat had attacked your leg in real life, it's doing something different to an as-if body loop, which is imagining it, right? So it's creating new body loops. I'm going to come back to that, but I just wanted to plant it there. Because those body loops will potentially, or could potentially, inform our understanding of the world moving forwards in a way that maybe is different to when it's simulated. And actually, just to round that off, a different audience member was talking about the quality of their emotional engagement with the stories. And she was comparing it to watching a movie. And she was saying when she watches a movie, she feels a lot too, right? She gets emotional, maybe she'll cry. But she was describing the quality of that emotion as a big thing. It was like a big, like, wah! That released something. Maybe it's that cathartic thing that de Boer's talking about, but there was a big thing. Whereas she was describing, following along these stories, there was a more nuanced, kind of subtle feeling along with that was different in quality to the big one that she would get if watching a movie. Which again, you know, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'd love to study that if anyone here like kind of is into that stuff. Because I think that's quite important at what the truth I'm trying to get to behind why these things are important, is this kind of feeling along with. But again, yeah, discussed in more detail in my thesis. Okay, so the next part is this idea of experience being mediated by others and the other people who are in the room and the other characters in a story. And I'm going to start this section with a little quote from Hannah Arendt, who's a hero of mine. To think with an enlarged mentality means that one trains one's imagination to go visiting. To think with an enlarged mentality, which means, so it's this idea of training your imagination to go visiting in order to understand other people. She kind of talks about if you've got many perspectives, you can create a field of shared reality from which to understand each other from. As opposed to kind of requiring everyone to step into your reality or to everyone to adopt everyone else. Like, actually, what we can do is create a field between all of these different perspectives. And the Of Home and Each Other, the McDonald's project that we were talking about earlier, came out of a research project with UE, AHRC funded, and we were trying to look at narrative and empathy and find ways to help engage empathy in audiences. But pretty soon in the initial research that we did, we sort of worked out that that was a really potentially quite problematic thing to be trying to do. There's a really deep vein running through the immersive world of this idea of, right, put on your VR headset and it's an empathy machine. You're going to see what it's like. You're going to feel what it's like to be in a refugee camp somewhere, right? And that's really dangerous. The problem with asking, and in fact, like my early projects were talking about, because we had this sort of internal thought thing and you were walking along as the character's walking along, and we used the metaphor, walking in someone else's shoes, to sort of describe what was happening. But again, if you're walking in someone else's shoes, where's that someone else? You're sort of deleting them by inhabiting them. You're deleting them and filling their shoes with yourself, right? And so that can be a bit problematic, is basically where we came to. And there's tons of reasons why, but I'm just going to summarize it into that. And if you want to talk more about it, I can. But it's deleterious empathy, potentially, right? And that's what we need to be careful of. And instead, so instead we were talking about intersubjectivity, so understanding others, and it became this dance between using these as-if body loops and these mirror neurons to like understand the experience of the other, as well as reminding the audience to jump back again. So we created punctuations of dissonance in the Of Home and Each Other story. So there were moments where you're walking through shopping district with Kelechi, you're hearing her, and then she goes and looks at her reflection in a shop window, and she's thinking about her life, and she's looking at her face and thinking about her face. And it's where you see, okay, yeah, I'm not this woman. I'm me, which is really important, particularly the context of that project where we knew the audience was going to be probably mostly white, probably quite middle class, people who didn't necessarily know what it was like. Like, how could they have empathy for the direct experience of a black woman who is in the process of migrating to the UK? Like, but what we can do is engender compassion and create a chance to go visiting with that character, like Aaron talks about. And there's something about creating shared activities as well. That, like, again, this is studies that show that when you do something with someone else, it makes you feel more positive towards them. These team building exercises, building stuff out of rolls of paper and paper clips and stuff to get the height. There's a reason that stuff is like inflicted on corporations across the world. And it's because it creates these moments of togetherness that like change our perspective of each other because we've done a thing together. And even if that's a fictional character, that can be really important. Just to go back around, that character, Kelechi, and that whole project was based on research that worked with and interviewed 25 different people who were migrants to Bristol to talk to them about what their experiences were like and what the important things were. And then a smaller group who were then involved in creating the core themes for the script. And then the script was written by someone who was in the process of applying for their own citizenship. Which was also like incredibly important that we had a kind of lived experience throughout that. It wasn't because there is this danger of like satisfying middle-class white people and helping them feel good about the world and themselves by doing a thing and then going home and just not acting again. So we're trying to be really careful about that. Okay, and yes, another thing that Aaron said was we need to allow ourselves to be conditioned by the other. And that was the sort of that was the environment we were trying to create in that project, was to allow the audience to be open to being conditioned by this other person's experience without pretending to be them or role-playing them, which is a problem, as we've discussed. Okay, right, racing ahead. To the worlding. So this being in a world, the material world, the imagined world. There's tons of stuff I could say about layering of like virtual and material worlds, but that's another talk. Particularly given the time we've got. So I'm going to like skip ahead a little bit to this idea of, well, apart from saying the material world's really important, and there's a reason why all of my things are in the real world, and it's because our, brains and bodies and everything about us is kind of experientially, what's the word? When you're like putting the levels right on a sound thing and you're just trying to get it all tweaked so it's balanced, equalized, all of that. So we're designed for all of this stuff, and as soon as we're just sat doing this, we're still feeling stuff. We're using our as if body loops, but we're not moving around and we're not feeling the wind on our face or smelling that person's aftershave, or we're kind of removed from all of the other sensorial stuff, and that stuff's really, really important. I'm just going to say that, but without going into too much detail. Again, 5 years, 40 minutes, not long enough. But there's something I wanted to talk about to do with the imagined world and play, which is also a sort of central theme of my work as a storyteller, and it's kind of explained quite well by Gregory Bateson, he was a psychiatrist, right? I always get this wrong, not a psychologist. I think he was a psychiatrist. Okay. Feel free to correct me if anyone knows better. But anyway, he wrote some interesting stuff about meta-communication. So it's this idea that sometimes we're behaving in ways where there's another understood meaning going on beyond what's actually just happening. And he gave the example of two dogs playing, right? So when two dogs are playing, they're kind of running around and nipping at each other. But each dog knows that a nip isn't a bite. But they also know that the nip represents a bite. So it's not real, but it is real, but it's not. It's meta-communication. I do this with my dog, I mean, he had 3 teeth removed yesterday, so not recently, but sorry. But I play tug with him. He loves playing tug. He will love playing tug again. He growls. He's got a play growl, right? And I know that it's a play growl because it's slightly different to the growl he does at the big scary dogs in the park. So he growls at me and I growl at him, and we're growling at each other, and we're playing with this idea that maybe we're having a tug fight, but we're not, but we are. And we're playing with that boundary between him being my dog and me being his human, and like what that means. And we're kind of pushing up against that, and but in a way that's not going to like damage either of us. And that's kind of the point of play, I guess, right? That's the point of play that I'm interested in. Play has many things, many points. But this is the one I'm into because it's this meta, this sort of imagined layer on our world, which kind of means that we can incorporate it with how we're understanding other people and what's going on for them, and how we're understanding the world itself through our bodies into this like storied reality, and sort of calling it this. This with these multi-layers all at play, all at the same time, and it's a powerful place that takes me into. Oh, this is good because we're really getting there. We're really nearly there, which gets me into wild stories. So my nearly final quote. Augusto Boal, okay, my hero. Perhaps the theatre is not a revolutionary act in itself, but it's surely a rehearsal for the revolution. The liberated spectator, the whole person, launches into action. No matter that the action is fictional, what matters is the action, right? So this is the solution to Debord's problem of like these spectators who are sort of sitting. I'm not going to say passive, but like inactively, is action. And Augusto Boal created forum theatre, or theatre of the oppressed, where the audience gets up and changes what's going on in the story, right? So it's a particular way of doing theatre, but it's getting the audience member up and moving around and engaging in the action that's really powerful, and has inspired quite a lot of the stuff that I've been up to. And then the final point in that is Hertzinger. So another philosopher, I guess, but who talks about play and games, who talked about, very quickly, methexis, or methetic consequences. And he's talking about, in the context of like Greek theatre, you've got mimesis, which is mime, which is like just copying reality. And then you've got diegesis, which is like a sort of, there's a narrator, there's a story being told. And then he talks about methexis, which is actually doing reality. So it's enacting and taking part in reality. And for me, this is a really important concept, because that's kind of what's at play in these sort of enacting stories that I've been talking about, these wild stories. And it's also, Hertzinger talks about this in the context of ritual. He's saying that within ritual, people are enacting reality in a particular context. I'm stepping beyond this line, and we're in the ritual space now, and stuff's going to unfold. But because we're all participating in it, there's something in that participation that does change the world, and it's because we are all engaging in it, and we are invested in it, right? And I'm not saying that these story game things are rituals. They are absolutely not that. But there's something about that we're sort of reaching towards it. This moving and acting together in order to change the world and change reality, because it's being changed in our bodies, because we are creating these body loops, right? We're creating these real world moments. That there's an aliveness in what we're doing that is getting recorded in our bodies and in our sensoria in a certain way that then affects what happens when we encounter it, again, in different contexts, which can be really interesting, right? Right, we're nearly there. Let me just double check I've got everything. I think we're doing good. I've jumped a little bit, but we're fine. Okay. Tea's not that refreshing when it's got milk in it. got a slightly stuck mouth. But thank you for the tea also. Really appreciate the tea. I did request the tea as soon as I got in late. So there's something here that's quite important, so I'm going to say it again, which is that the wild story essentially is about using the audience's body as a technology, right? It's not getting caught away with like the newest headset, the newest AR thing, or something that's interactive over there that will be like discontinued 6 months later. It's about thinking about the nature of our experience as humans with fleshy, incorporated, nuanced, autobiographically affected, have I had breakfast this morning type framing on what's happening right in that moment in time. And I think the more we can design around that and the more we can think about that in terms of the fleshy, incorporate knowing and the intersubjective, there's all kinds of beautiful intersubjective stuff at play all the time when we're in company with other people or with other characters or in the woods and with other trees or with the rocks. When we're in company with anything. And then there's this play layer as well, and this imagination layer, and this kind of really rich thing that can happen when all of these things are thrown together. And I think that's what's powerful about these wild stories. Okay, so how do we rewild our audiences? The final, like 2 more minutes. So here's a Donna Haraway, because she's great. It matters what we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots knot knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories, right? So that is beautiful. And we are living in a world where we're very screen dominated, which is using our as-if body loops. And it's like a mass industrialization, actually, of that quality of our experience, which I think is like, its time is done, or at least it's great, but not for 4 hours every night, right? I'm talking about myself here. Like, what are those other ways that we can tell stories with these new technologies that exist? What are those other ways that we can tell stories with these new understandings that we have about how our reality works, right, as beings that are also in a material world that also has its own beingness. Like, how can we weave that into something and unleash our audiences from their kind of mass battery farmed cages and like lure them out with little scraps of like, enacted audio stuff or participative podcast or kind of whatever the hell it is, right? Let's lure them out and like unleash them into the woods. And sure, some of them aren't going to do very well, but we don't really know what we're doing, right? We've been trapped in these freaking cages doing these kinds of stories for a long time. And I'm incorporating books into this. It's all great stuff. Like, I love reading books. I love watching films. But let's imagine beyond that into the darkness, the stuff that we haven't done yet. The technology's there, but we're not really asking ourselves this question at all. And I think it's time to do that. Let's lure the audience out. And maybe we'll end up, maybe they won't be rewilded, but they'll be a bit feral and a bit interesting, a bit up for it, like rummaging through bins and stuff. So that's, I think that, hang on. This is the other thing, is that I've got tiny spider handwriting and I'm becoming long-sighted because I'm getting old. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Oh, yes, right. So this is the final remark. Audiences who play and change stories are more able to play and change with society, right? And that's what we're after. That's what we need. So, yeah, that's it. I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you very much, Rosie. And I hope Ernie's okay.
He is, yeah, he's fine. He's fine.
Good.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question for Rosie? We got time for 1 or 2? Oh, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. This was really good. I have a question where, like, have you ever crafted an experience or story where people reacted in a way where you were like, oh shit, that went totally wrong, that's not what I expected, that's really weird?
Yes. I was involved in something about 15 years ago that was like, we called it Prison Break. And it was, I was involved in it. This wasn't my project, but I was helping. And we were sort of doing the Stanford prison experiment, but with theatre, which is like so questionable. I know that now. This is like 15, 20 years ago. And like, it was the Wild West, right? Artists could do whatever they liked. But no, it was kind of great in a lot of ways. But one of the problems was, it was called Prison Break. And we'd organised this thing. There was like 100 actors and 120 audience. And I had these prison guards. Anyway, the main problem was that people kept escaping before we were ready for them to. They were supposed to escape at the end, but it was called Prison Break, so they just tried to escape whenever, because of course they did. Like, they wanted to win the game, but then they'd get out and they'd be like, "Oh, okay, well, what?" Like, and we'd be like, "Dude, you've got to get back to the stories happening." So the second night we created a place called Paradise, which was a room that had a party happening in it. And then we spread a rumour about, have you found paradise yet? Like, as if it was like this dodgy thing. And so there's a place for people to go if they escaped. They'd go and have a bit of a party and a drink and then be returned back to their like little crew. But yeah, that happens all the time. Audience never do what you think they should do, which is great. But there's something to do with allowing that without the thing breaking that's really important. Because otherwise, you don't want their experience being, oh, the thing broke. You want the experience being, oh yeah, I broke it and then this happened. So, with the experiential podcast thing, like, we were really clear about that people didn't have to participate in every moment, and it would still be fine. Like, and I think that's something that I incorporate always now, is like, it has to work even when people are barely doing it. It needs to not feel broken.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that was super articulate. That was amazing. So the bit of this that I was kind of surprised to miss, maybe, is a lot of it was kind of focusing on solo experiences. And you kind of mentioned it yourself almost at the end, that like, when we're with others, things are very different. You know, your experience is affected by those around you. And so I'm thinking about being in McDonald's and having, I'm in the voice in my head and I'm with somebody else. And I personally think I've nailed that experience. I've got it, I have received what the artist intended. But I can only really evaluate that in dialogue with somebody else. Only by having a conversation, only through a back and forth process can I find out that actually somebody else's experience was quite different, and really start to actually explore it in a participatory way. And what do you think about that solo versus dialogue and intersubjectivity?
Yeah, I mean, they're all good in different ways, right? So the solo thing is beautiful because you can get to a depth that sometimes isn't possible in a social dynamic. And you can get to emotional places without it being embarrassing. But there are great group things that I think Punch Drunk have done a clever thing with their masks, so that you're wandering around and you're directing your gaze. You're not participating in the action, but you have some agency in where you're wandering around and rummaging in drawers and stuff. That's quite nice. But because you're wearing a mask, you're not embarrassed. And I think there's a big embarrassment factor for normal people. Not talking about people but for normal people when they're engaging in because a lot of the live theatrical things that I did in my early career, half the audience would always be dragged in by a partner or a friend, and they didn't know what was happening, and then until it was happening to them. And usually it was fine, but I'm quite aware of that. So, but there's a place for that. It's just not what I do. So I talk a lot about this solo stuff, but I also do group things as well. There's a time radio and an echo horn from some National Trust things that I've done with with object storytelling things that are about group dynamics too. So there's ways. And I'm working on one of those at the moment. So there's ways to do that as well. But the other thing I will say is that talking about it afterwards is really important. And we did that with the zombie game, I think the second year, people at the end were wandering around going, where's the zombie disco? And someone had spread a rumour, and we didn't have one. So the next year we did. And that was a really good place. And the Prison Break one, we had this, it was really important, because that questionable project, but it was really cool as well. It was really fun and silly. But we had a moment at the end where people could hang out with the prison guards who'd been bossing them around and stuff, and have drinks. And so it was, that felt really important. The debrief moment felt really important. And that podcast thing I was talking about happened during lockdown. So there wasn't much scope for that. But I think actually that is really lovely when people can talk about their experience, and it helps them digest it and integrate.
All right, I think we got one question online.
Thank you. Right, so from YouTube, we've got someone that wants to know, have you ever worked with stories for children?
Yes, yeah. So I don't know, can you grab an echo horn? Is there one on the shelf there, or a time radio? So I've done more commercial things with heritage interpretation.
The brown thing, the big brown thing.
The big thing that's a horn. Yeah, grab it. Yeah. Grab it.
Yeah, sorry, I've got my COVID vaccine.
Oh, babe, sorry. Yeah, so I do things for families as well, generally in more kind of, for like heritage. So it's a bit more commercial application-y type stuff. But this is an echo horn, which is like a storytelling device. But again, it's for an audio experience. But there's something about a family carrying this thing around in a castle, which then unleashes echoes that are trapped in the castle's walls. That is like really cool. And there's something about having the magical object that gives the family permission, or the group permission, to then be playful, because it's clear they're doing something weird because they've got a weird thing. And this has got like a volume control on it as well, so you can kind of manage your experience, which is really nice. But my company's done this sort of commercially, and I'm working on another project at the moment. Actually, I didn't go through to my final slide. Oh well, it's fine. Doesn't matter. Okay, sure. It had some information about other projects that I'm working on at the moment, but so yes, there are ways to do this with kids, abso-freaking-lutely. But I think the thing is that adults don't get given much permission to play and be imaginative. So I've always been more interested in that, but it totally applies to kids. But they know how to do that already, and they're doing it all the time anyway. So yeah.
All right, time for one last quick question.
I was just wondering if you've got any. There's the last slide. If you've got any projects that we can go and experience at the moment, because I found out about your work just after the McDonald's project, and I was really gutted to have missed it. Are you going to be reviving that one, or have you got anything that we can go and do now?
I'd love to revive that one because it was beautiful. But yes, there are things that exist. There is so the experiential podcast. I haven't got it on there. Well, I have. Hang on. Is it on a different slide? Hang on. No, it's fine. So if you go to wherever you get your podcasts, this isn't old anyway. Wherever you get your podcasts, and it's called. If you search for Play Inside Other Mothers, and there's 3 series there. So Other Mothers is the first series, and then there's another series. There's another 2 series that were. Again, this is a collaboration with Michelle Roach, and this we worked with writers in the UK, Palestine, and Egypt, and there's a series that's to do with oppression of women, essentially, and then there's another series that's to do with queer experience, and they're very beautiful, but they exist. So Play Inside, and if you look for Other Mothers, that seems to, and then you'll find all of them, and the second 2 series are in Arabic as well. And then there's this thing, which It Ever Was, which is the audio thing that I did for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust this year, which is about butch women in Shakespeare's time, because they existed. I found them in the archive. But I kind of triangulated that with butch women who exist today, and kind of there's something about women in history and this kind of flattening that has happened because they weren't writing their own history for so long. So I'm trying to stand them up again and 3-dimensionalize them with people's lived experience today, from maybe similar-ish, but still acknowledging this is history, right? We don't really know what happened. And also history is very much in the eye of the person writing it, which for the longest time was educated white men. Nothing wrong with those people, but it's only one perspective, right? Like, and it'd be nice to have other. So it was cool getting to go to that archive, flicking through this book about written by a Puritan priest about all the things that are wrong with the world, and there's like 3 pages about women brazenly marching around London in men's clothes, and I cried. And there's other evidence as well, and obviously Shakespeare was doing a lot of cross-dressing in his plays and was also bisexual, and so there's lots of there's a lot of stuff there. But if you care to like lift the curtain, and yeah, the other project that is just finishing that I'm working on is as a My World research fellow on the Future Radio project, which is imagining what radio might be like in 5 to 10 years' time in the advent of AI. So I've created some speculative audio fictions of people listening to future radios and like what that might be like, which will be available soon, I imagine, somewhere.
Yes,
But
thank you.
don't know yet.
Showcase 10th of October?
Yes, and there's a showcase, Bristol Tech Festival. On the 10th of October, there's a My World showcase in the afternoon at 2:00. I don't know how you would. I guess if Bristol Tech Fest,
I think
My
it's
World,
on the Bristol Tech Fest website.
But yes, there's a My World showcase, and we're going to be showing the audio for the Future Radio thing at that on the 10th. Yeah, and my current another current project is just looking at how to use these kinds of wild stories to help people open up to each other, and that thing. Hannah Arendt talks about being open to being conditioned by the other. And so we're actually going to be playing with that a little bit and seeing how narrative can do that and ways that we can enable that so that people can be more open to each other for difficult subjects. But yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much,
Great,
Rosie.
thank you very much. Okay.
Right. If this idea of breaking outside of the screen appeals to you and you're an artist, please do keep an eye on the Watershed website. We will be launching our call out for our winter residencies this year. The theme relates very strongly to a lot of what Rosie's been talking about.
You should get me in as a consultant.
Maybe we will. Let's talk later. All right, before you go, please don't forget today is First Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. today. We've got our monthly social event. Come along, grab a drink, see some of the work our community has been producing. If you want to stick around in Hot Desk today, find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team. We'll be happy to help. Studio team, give us a wave. Here we are. If you're watching online, please drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and hopefully we'll see you all again next time.